Good afternoon and welcome to 12 and a half minutes. My name is Andy Campbell and this is your weekly hit of hope, information and inspiration brought to you by Elevator, one of Scotland's leading entrepreneurial and business support organisations. At Elevator, we get to work with a wide range of different companies and entrepreneurs. And the life of an entrepreneur is a challenging one indeed. You risk so much when you embark on your business journey. But when you think about it, the risks are to a degree measurable. And it's rare, I suppose, in many of the jobs that we see, in many of the business sectors that we see, that your life is ever on the line, so to speak. But what happens if you choose a career path? What happens if you choose a job, a passion, and that puts your life on the line on a regular basis? How would you cope? How would you be able to adapt? How would you be able to go back again to follow your passion, to do what you need to do when you know that your very life is at stake? Well, our guest today is someone that does that, someone that knows exactly what it's like to have their life on the line, to be able to tell the stories that they need to be able to tell, to report back to us about what is going on in war-torn parts of the world. So I'm absolutely delighted today that we're joined by a person who is a war correspondent, a broadcaster, journalist and photographer. David Pratt, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Andy, and good afternoon to everyone, no matter where you might be. I suppose, really, can I just start by saying, the question that I'm always asked is, how in God's name did you get into this rather crazy business that you're involved in, And, all I can say is that it was a convoluted route, and, I didn't start in any sort of conventional way in terms of what I was doing. I'm a working class boy, you're not meant to go into the kind of higher echelons of journalism, I suppose, by and large, if you come from that background. And, I came from a family that were very involved with things military and were interested. It was a very kind of manly family, if I can put it that way. And had uncles and fathers who were in the service, whether it be the merchant navy or the military and whatever. So I kind of grew up with this passion, if you like, for all things war-y. Not uncommon for a boy, it has to be said,
Mm-hmm.
But strangely enough, despite having that passion, I ended up going to Glasgow School of Art, where I trained as a painter, which is about as far removed from a military establishment as you can possibly get, as you can imagine. And it was really just during that time that this interest in photography began to develop. And I was also very politicized. And that, I suppose, really sort of led me to the wars, as I put it, And in terms of this notion of commitment, of risk to something like that, I think I've always been a wee bit seduced by that in a way, even as a boy. I mean, my grandfather and people were very much into mountaineering and risky sports and whatever. Mm-hmm. So that was always part of growing up. So in a way, going to art school was a risk. It was something that I suppose my parents didn't expect. Many people that knew me didn't expect. And while there, I took another risk and, basically sort of blagged my way to my first. It wasn't even a foreign job. I just got on the plane and went to Nicaragua shortly after the revolution in 1979. And there I took pictures. There I began to write, began to work as a journalist, and the rest, as I say, is history. And it was around that same time as well that I made my first visit to Afghanistan.
Thank you so much, David, for that overview. And it's interesting to see your career path and where it took you initially into Glasgow School of Art to do one thing. So clearly, that eye for imagery was something that you had, but also a passion to tell the stories that were going on in other parts that were foreign to us. That I can completely understand the art connection and being able to record it, but telling that story is such an important part of what you do as well, David. Was that something that again came naturally to you?
I think I've been a compulsive storyteller. I was a voracious reader as a child, as well, and storytelling, even listening to my father and to my relatives, stories of their own sort of daring do, and exploits in the Navy or the military or whatever, was something that became part of my kind of DNA in a way, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I was desperately keen to tell stories of my own and find the appropriate medium, if you like, or conduit by which to do that. And I was always torn between the visual stuff and the written word. I even considered going to university actually to do an English literature degree with a view to going into journalism, which is the career path that my brother actually followed himself. So we both of us went into journalism. Mine was just a little bit more convoluted in that way. So, you know, it's like dipping into the toolbox, if you like, you know, whatever it was, whether it be painting, whether it was photography, whether it was words, to tell stories. And as a very politicized individual with a yearn for adventure and for foreign travel, that's what took me off in that direction.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one person's adventure might be sightseeing, you know, climbing mountain peaks. Your sense of adventure is slightly different because it is fraught with danger and volatility and the chance of not seeing tomorrow. David, what has been that within you that's you know, you've chosen to pursue that side of things?
I think there are some people like that. I mean, you know, that are drawn, the same people that are drawn to kind of risk, you know, extreme sports, if you like, in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was a massive professional challenge that I found really quite a draw, in a sense. You know, journalism is one thing, putting yourself literally on a front line of a war, no matter, and in some far-flung part of the world, is something else entirely. And I like the notion of that professional challenge, if you like. I mean, most people within my discipline, within journalism, you know, whether you're a sports writer or an arts writer or whatever, but I always felt that kind of frontline eyewitness reporting, and it doesn't get more literally eyewitness than if you're using a camera, and photography, I suppose, does remain my first love. That idea of actually improvising, of having to think on your feet, you know, of having to weigh up calculated risk, because that's what you have to do before you go to a war zone. I love doing these things are now called risk assessments, you know. But when I first started going off to war zones, there was no such thing as health and safety, certainly not in a war zone, and there still isn't. And risk assessments were a rare thing, so you had to do your own. So I really relished the challenge of being able to work that out and calculate the risk, if you like, in terms of what the return would be story-wise or journalistically.
Yeah, and some of the places that you've travelled to and some of the war hotspots that you've been to, your life, I mean, this is not an over-exaggeration, but your life has quite literally been on the line minute to minute.
Well, I mean, I've lost friends. I've had friends wounded, I've had friends killed, some of them very close friends. I have come close on a few occasions myself, touch wood. You know, I've never actually, in the sense, been wounded. And I have been taken, you know, I have been kidnapped, I have been held prisoner, you know, I have actually been tortured during that kidnapping and saw colleagues murdered before my eyes. So it's something that, you know, at the very sharp end, I have actually experienced. And but in a way, I've been very fortunate. You know, there's a kind of, you know, 9 lives here, really, when I look back at it over the years. And I think as I get older, that notion of risk, whenever I travel off somewhere now, for example, when we were going over back to Afghanistan last year to film the documentary Pictures from Afghanistan for the BBC, I was returning to places now, and it's interesting, you know, here I am, 62 in the last few weeks, and how I think about those places compared to when I first went there in my 20s, because you're indestructible in your 20s. Everyone's indestructible when you're in your 20s. So there is a different relationship I have with the way I operate in the ground. I suppose over the years I've become far more calculating in terms of weighing up that risk. There was always a wee touch of the gung-ho, I think, when you're younger, but that's to be expected.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, you know, we see that in business. You know, naivety is sometimes not necessarily a disadvantage, because if you knew the risks, if you knew what you were perhaps getting into, you might not go, you might not explore, you might not do what you need to do. So not knowing is sometimes better, because it allows you to immerse yourself in environments and situations that perhaps with a same.
I think that's true up to a point. I mean, I think a certain ignorance is bliss approach if you knew what you were getting into. But one of the things that I think about working in war zones or in hostile environments like that is really doing your homework, is really knowing what
Yeah.
the potential threats are, and working as much as possible to mitigate against that, and make sure that you reduce the risk aspect. It's a constant checks and balances. I mean, I'll often sit down with colleagues that I work with closely in the morning before, for example, we go out into the field. The battle for Mosul in Iraq was a point in case, and every day our journey to the front line was a fairly precarious affair. But we would sit down and talk through where the difficult areas were, how far we're prepared to go from the information that we had, the intelligence that we gleaned from fixers or whatever. So you create a picture and you operate on that picture. But there does come a point when you're on a street somewhere and there's bullets flying, where you have to make that rather instantaneous decision. Am I going to run across that street and get for those better images? Or am I going into that village or that town to interview such and such a person? And everything, life is fraught with risk anyway, but all you can do is calculate it as best as possible, Andy,
Yeah, and be as ready to fight or flight depending on the circumstance.
Improvise, think on your feet, be situationally aware. I think these are all things which I suppose in business, are vital as well, really, in that sense. So I think a lot of those qualities, they just tend to be a little bit more intense and a little bit sharper and speedier in the environments that I'm in.
And I think, I guess you have probably built up sort of mindsets of resilience, because you mentioned there you've had colleagues who have been shot, injured, and even lost their lives. You have to have a certain type of resilience internally within yourself to be able to deal with it, switch off to it. What's the
I think there is, you develop coping mechanisms over the years. One of the things I said in the documentary is that I don't mind going out on assignment. It's coming home that I find very difficult. It's like a form of decompression, adjusting back to normal life here. But you have to be resilient. You have to be physically resilient. I mean, there was a colleague of mine used to joke about the key things for a foreign correspondent were the ability to eat anything, sleep whenever you have to sleep, not unlike a soldier in that sense, in a way, and go for quite a considerable period of time running on virtually empty, but still be able to make life or death kind of decisions in that way. And these are all qualities that are crucial.
So you've documented photographically everything, and we know that obviously Pictures from Afghanistan, which was the film that you made, was highly acclaimed. You have an exhibition which is touring right now, but you can see that virtually. Is that correct, David?
That's right. You can see it virtually at Sogo Arts, the gallery where the exhibition was originally mounted. Indeed, it was the debut exhibition for the gallery when it opened in Glasgow. But that same exhibition will be going to the International School in Geneva, COVID permitting, in January, and possibly the UN. And we hope to have it in Edinburgh as well. It was meant to be at Summer Hall during the summer, but that obviously too is something to look forward to.
And David, you were very kind to send a few images through, which I'll be able to go through, but it might be good to just get some of your thoughts as these images come up and what we're perhaps seeing here.
Well, this is actually taken in the Hindu Kush mountains when I was accompanying a group of Mujahideen guerrillas during the Russian war. They are actually just emerging from the mountainside after a Russian aerial bombardment, and there was still a lot of dust around and whatever. They've been in bunkers and little kind of cubby holes buried into the rock there during that bombardment. But that gives an idea of the kinds of environment. And, from a risk point of view, in those days, there were no mobile phones. You were hiking over the Hindu Kush, sometimes for months at a time with these people.
Yeah, this is quite a powerful image. This
is in the 1990s in Kabul during the internal sort of factional fighting between rival Afghan groups. That building is actually used to be the Russian Cultural Center. When we were over recently, it's just been rebuilt. It's unrecognizable now from those pictures then. Yeah. And indeed, that day was typical of some of the risks that are taken, because I ended up with a broken hand because there was some backblast from the firing, and I was injured during that period.
Yeah, and of course the human side of what you do as well. That must be incredibly emotional.
Absolutely. Here I am talking about risk, but we want to talk about real risk here, Andy. The risks that people like this woman take to make sure that her child is safe, and the many refugees that I've met fleeing their own homes. These are the people that take real risks in these situations.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. David, the exhibition is online, and Elevator will try and get the link up to that so that anyone that's watching now or on catch up can see the link to the program. But I guess just finally, just to see what's next for you, because you're not a man that stays sedentary for any period of time, I would imagine. So what's on the horizon for you, David?
I have itchy feet you would not believe. I'm such a nomad. We are hoping to do a follow-up, possibly even more than one follow-up to pictures from Afghanistan, and we're in the development phase of that, which would take me back to Iraq, possibly in the new year, again, COVID permitting, but that's in the pipeline at the moment.
Well, David, listen, thank you so much. We're unfortunately out of our 12 and a half minutes. We crammed in so much there, but we could go on and speak for hours about the experiences that you have had. I guess all that we can do is thank you for your wonderful service, for telling those stories, for capturing those images and making sure that we don't lose track of really what is going on in some of the most challenging environments in the planet. So, David, thank you so much indeed for all of that. And I guess it would be wrong of me not to wish you to stay safe on your next travel, whatever that is, and as little as that may mean. But please do look after yourself, take care of yourself, and we look forward to the next instalment from you, David. But for now, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Cheers.
Well, that was David Pratt, just an extraordinary life lived, and the insights and stories that he would be able to tell about what he's seen in the world, I guess will be there for everyone to explore and see. So thank you, David, for joining us for 12 and a half minutes. We'll put the link up, as we mentioned, to ensure that you can all catch that virtual exhibition that David has on at the moment. Next week, obviously, we're not here because we're now running on a 2-weekly basis. So 12 and a half minutes, we'll be back again with you on the 23rd of October. And we have Craig Wilson joining us. Craig is known as the Kilted Chef, and there's also restaurateur at Eat in the Green, and we'll be exploring what COVID and the impact that COVID has had on the food and drink sector and his own particular business, and how he has adapted and pivoted during this particular time. So thank you once again for joining us here at 12 and a half minutes. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn and Twitter. We're also on YouTube, so make sure that you like and subscribe to us there. But for now, thank you very much indeed, and be brave. Thank you.